You've probably been called an overthinker, maybe even quiet, distant, or a little strange. Like your mind doesn't just sit still the way everyone else's seems to. You notice things you weren't supposed to notice. You replay conversations long after they end. You question small details that most people don't even see. And after a while, it starts to feel like something is off. Like maybe you're the problem. But what if the things you've been trying to fix aren't flaws at all? What if the way your mind keeps going, keeps analyzing, keeps pulling things apart, is actually doing something most people can't? Because here's the part that's easy to miss. The habits that make you feel different on the outside often come from something much deeper on the inside. And most people completely miss this. We've been taught to recognize intelligence in a very specific way. The loudest voice in the room, the fastest answer, the person who always seems confident and certain. But real intelligence doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it pauses before speaking. Sometimes it questions instead of answering. We tend to notice what's visible. But intelligence is often something that happens internally, not something performed on the outside. It's less about showing what you know, and more about how deeply you process what's in front of you. And that's why it can feel confusing, because the way your mind works doesn't always match what we've been told smart is supposed to look like. But once you start noticing these patterns, certain habits begin to make a lot more sense. You don't just think, you stay with a thought longer than most people do. A simple conversation doesn't end when it's over. It follows you into quiet moments, into late nights, into those small pockets of silence where your mind starts replaying everything. The tone, the words, the pauses, what was said, what wasn't said, what it might have meant. And it's not just replaying, it's adjusting, imagining, running different versions of the same moment like your brain is trying to understand every possible angle. Can feel exhausting sometimes, like your mind doesn't have an off switch. But this isn't just overthinking in the way people casually say it. It's something deeper, what psychologists often describe, in simple terms, as processing things at a higher depth. Your mind doesn't stop at the surface. It keeps going until it feels complete. That's why you notice patterns others miss. That's why small things stay with you longer. And maybe it's not that your mind is doing too much. Maybe it's just going further than most. You don't avoid people, but you don't always need them either. There's a certain kind of quiet you're drawn to. Early mornings before the world fully wakes up, headphones on, not even playing anything sometimes, just enough to create space between you and the noise. And in those moments, something settles. Silence isn't empty for you. It's where things finally start making sense. Thoughts line up more clearly. Ideas connect without interruption. You can actually hear yourself think. To others, it might look like distance. But for you, it feels like clarity. Because when there's too much noise, too many voices, too much surface-level conversation, your mind doesn't get the room it needs to go deeper. So you step back, not to disconnect, but to reset. And maybe it's not that you prefer being alone. Maybe it's that your mind works best when it finally has space to breathe. You rarely take things at face value, even when it would be easier to. Someone says something simple, and your mind quietly pauses on it. Not to argue, just to understand. Why did they say it like that? What did they really mean? Does it actually make sense? Even small things can stick with you. A detail in a story that doesn't quite add up. A rule everyone follows without questioning. A pattern in people's behavior that feels predictable once you notice it. And sometimes it's frustrating, because while others move on quickly, your mind keeps pulling at the thread, trying to see what's underneath. It's not about being negative or difficult. It's more like your brain is naturally wired to look for patterns, connections, inconsistencies, deeper meaning. Something psychologists often describe simply as pattern recognition. And once you start seeing those patterns, it's hard to unsee them. That moment where you catch something subtle and realize, wait, this actually explains a lot. And suddenly, things that felt random don't feel so random anymore. It's not that you can't connect with people. It's just that a lot of conversations don't seem to stay with you. You can sit in a group, listen, respond, even smile, but something feels slightly out of sync. like the interaction is happening on one level, and your mind is quietly operating on another. It's not about thinking you're better than anyone. If anything, it can feel isolating, like you wish things went a little deeper, lasted a little longer, meant a little more. And sometimes you catch yourself pulling back. Not because you don't care, but because it's hard to stay engaged in something that feels surface level when your mind naturally looks for more. So you adapt. You listen more. You observe more. And over time, you start to wonder if this quiet distance is just part of who you are. But maybe it's not distance. Maybe it's just a different depth. There's a simple way to understand why your mind works like this. Most people's thinking moves in a straight line, one thought, one conclusion, then it stops. But your mind doesn't really do that. It's more like opening multiple tabs at once. One idea leads to another, then another. And before you know it, you're seeing connections, possibilities, and outcomes all at the same time. Psychologists often describe this as processing more variables at once. Not in a complicated way, just that your brain doesn't settle quickly. Keeps exploring. So instead of stopping at the first answer, you naturally go a few steps further. You compare, you question, you simulate. And that's why things can feel deeper, sometimes heavier, but also more clear. Because while others see one layer, your mind is already looking at what's underneath it. This kind of mind can feel exhausting sometimes. When your thoughts don't slow down easily, even simple things can start to feel heavy. A small decision turns into 10 possibilities. A quiet moment turns into a long chain of thinking you didn't plan to start. And socially, it can take more energy than it seems. Listening deeply, reading between the lines, staying mentally present, it adds up in ways most people don't notice. So it's not unusual to feel mentally tired, even when nothing big happened. But that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It just means your mind is doing more in the background than it appears on the surface. And like anything that works at a deeper level, it needs more space, more rest, more understanding. Not fixing, just recognizing. Because once you understand this about yourself, the weight of it starts to feel a little lighter. Some of the clearest moments happen in the quiet corners of your day. Late at night, when the world is hushed, your thoughts drift freely. The soft glow of a lamp, the faint hum of a distant appliance. Everything seems sharper, more vivid. You notice details others might overlook. The subtle tone in someone's voice, the pattern of shadows on the wall, the way words land differently than expected. During the day, you might catch yourself observing small gestures, tiny habits, or repeated behaviors that most people pass right by. A flicker of emotion on a friend's face, the rhythm of footsteps, or even the way light hits a familiar object. These moments aren't just passing observations. They're where your mind quietly connects the dots, weaving meaning out of what seems ordinary. And in these small pockets of awareness, you start to recognize a rhythm to your thinking, a depth to your perception, and a clarity that often goes unseen by the world around you. Maybe you were never too much or too sensitive. Maybe your mind simply works differently, processing, noticing, and feeling things more deeply than most. Those habits that felt awkward or exhausting, the late-night thinking, the quiet observation, the constant questioning, aren't flaws. They're part of how you navigate the world with more depth, more awareness, more insight. The traits that sometimes made you feel out of place are often the same ones that allow you to notice patterns, connect ideas, and understand people on a subtle level. What seemed like a weakness can quietly become a strength. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always obvious. But the way your mind works, the way you perceive and respond, gives you a perspective that many will never have. Maybe being different isn't a limitation at all. Maybe it's exactly what makes you capable of seeing the world in a way only you can. If this feels familiar, take a moment to notice how much of it shapes the way you experience the world. There's more to explore. Patterns, habits, and little quirks of the mind that reveal even deeper layers of how you think, feel, and perceive. If you want to continue uncovering these insights, make sure to stay connected. Subscribe and join us as we dive into the next video, where we'll explore another surprising way your mind operates, and why some of your most unusual habits are actually signs of a sharper, more aware brain. Take it in slowly, reflect on what resonates, and remember. Noticing is the first step to understanding, and maybe even appreciating, your unique way of being.